Peter Molyneux was a nobody. He was an unremarkable student with few prospects, but he did have an unwavering ambition. He wanted to be successful. By the time he left college, he wasn't exactly sure how he'd find success. One thing that resonated with him was computing. He had a knack for programming. He found a job with a sports mail-order business, helping to set up their computer systems. On the back of that, he was set up with his own business, selling floppy disks to schools. He called his company Vulcan Computing. He found the schools were less interested in the disks than the content on them, so he put together simple edutainment packages to enhance the value of his offering. This was a limited market that didn't afford Peter the success he desired. He decided to target a broader, general audience, taking out an advert in Acorn User in May 1984. His game was a business simulator called The Entrepreneur. He promoted it with a competition to win £100 and braced himself to deal with the deluge of orders he was due to receive. He sold 2 copies. Fair to say, his foray into self-published software was not the success he desired. And so, when another business opportunity presented itself, he moved on. He met a girl, and Peter was keen to impress her. He learned that her father had an opportunity in the import-export business. He jumped at the chance. He set up a company called Taurus Impex with acquaintance Les Edgar. Peter and Les had met some years earlier when Peter bought a computer from his shop. They shared a similar sense of humour and a similar ambition for success. Taurus sold money systems to Switzerland and baked beans to the Middle East. Peter was earning just about enough to eat, but success had once again eluded him. He did have plans for Taurus. Peter wanted to break into the lucrative financial software field. He planned a suite of accounting, invoicing, and stock control programs. But these ideas didn't come to fruition. Fate threw a curveball in the form of a phone call from Commodore. They were about to release their new home computer. They were hoping to encourage software developers to support the new Amiga. Commodore offered 6 Amigas to Peter's company. There was the implicit condition that Taurus would develop for the new machine. But Peter realized something was amiss. Taurus Impex was not an established software development company. Peter's own software efforts were not spectacular enough to warrant such an offer. Commodore had made a mistake. They had intended to contact Taurus, as in the donut, not Taurus, the bull. Taurus were a reputable developer of networking software. Taurus were 2 men selling baked beans in a tiny office that reeked of cigarettes and desperation. All the same, Peter had a choice to make. He could take the moral path, inform Commodore that they had made a mistake, and thank them for their time. Or he could take Commodore up on their deal for free machines and start to develop for the Amiga. I mean, he knew how to program, and when opportunity knocks, you answer. So, he started work on Amiga Software. His first product was a database program called Acquisition. Peter dubbed it the most complete database system conceived on any microcomputer. He may have been overselling it, but it was adequate. It even won a Product of the Year award in Germany. Peter followed Acquisition with XCAD, a 2D computer-aided drawing package. In the early days, the Amiga market was small, and so too were the returns. But while profits were not spectacular, the company had at least something coming in. As the Amiga grew, it was clear that productivity software was not the most profitable sector. For most users, the Amiga was a games machine. Lured in by the prospect of greater sales, Peter and Les decided to set up a sub-label to focus on games. When devising a name for this new brand, a pottery figurine provided inspiration. It was a bullfrog. So they founded Bullfrog Productions, a sub-brand of Taurus to differentiate their entertainment software. By this time, the money from acquisition and XCAD was starting to run dry. Times were hard at Taurus. Peter learned through friends that Firebird were looking for someone to port a game to the Amiga. The game in question was Druid 2 Enlightenment on the Commodore 64. The prospect of game development interested Peter. The prospect of £4,000 for his efforts interested him more. So he eagerly accepted and started work on the Amiga version. The result was an unspectacular port. The graphics were enhanced, as you'd expect for a 16-bit system, but it didn't run at full frame rate, and the scrolling was not quite as smooth. The important thing was that Peter got paid, and Bullfrog had released their first game. Now they had a chance to develop something original, an opportunity to further establish themselves as game developers and build a reputation. Wanting to play it safe, they went for a shoot-'em-up, a top-down scroller called Fusion. They managed to secure Electronic Arts as a publisher. It was a bland affair, simple shooting with a questionable frame rate. It received middling scores in the magazines. Some were more generous, tipping into the 80% range. Both Druid 2 and Fusion brought in some money to the company, but finances were far from secure. They had taken on new staff and now had wages to pay. Unless things improved, the outlook for Bullfrog was bleak. They discussed whether they should cut their losses and close the company. But Peter, ever hopeful, had an idea. He took inspiration from Virus, a game by David Braben. It featured a 3D landscape that you could fly over. Bullfrog's artist, Glenn Corpus, had prototyped an isometric tiling system for landscapes. When Peter saw it, he saw the potential for a game. He imagined little people roaming over the terrain. He imagined the player shaping the landscape from a bird's eye view. It wasn't a complete idea. He had no clue about how the game would play or what the goal would be, but he was nonetheless inspired. The crystal of a concept was grown. The little people would settle into houses if they found a suitable place. You could direct your people with something called a papal magnet. They added an opposing tribe. More actions too, instead of simple terraforming, fueled by the cumulative strength of your followers, which they called mana. From a simple seed, the isometric terraforming experiment had transformed into something new. It pitted you versus a rival, had you flinging fire spells and volcanoes, all in effort to destroy your opponent and protect your own tribe. This was a god game. This was the first god game. This was Populous. It was a radical departure from the safe world of shoot-'em-ups. Somehow they managed to convince Electronic Arts to take a chance on it. For much of its development, Populous was a multiplayer-only game. As deadlines passed by, they hurried to assemble a single-player mode with an AI to play against. The campaign was 500 procedurally generated worlds. With the campaign in place and the last-minute addition of an end screen, Populous was complete. The game was ready for release in June 1989. As review copies went out, a nervousness permeated the Bullfrog offices. There was much riding on Populous's success. A dud could spell the end for the studio, and the concept was pretty left field. But the fear was unfounded. The reviews were positive, scores were in the 90% bracket. They liked it, and most important of all, the game sold well. The core concept of being a god and unleashing divine power was a compelling one. Bullfrog's first royalty check was for £13,000. The second was for £250,000. The game was selling very well indeed, and Bullfrog had an assured future. Populous went on to sell over 3 million copies. It's regarded as one of the finest games of the era. It was a hit. Peter Molyneux had craved success for the longest time. It had taken many attempts and a string of failures, but with Populous, he had achieved his goal. He had a successful game, made a significant amount of money, and overnight, he was a darling of the press. He was the man behind Populous, after all, and a pioneer of the new God game genre. For the first time, he had a reputation, and it was a good one. But was Populous a fluke? Bullfrog had found success, but next was the unenviable task of a follow-up. Their next game was Flood, a platformer more in the arcade vein of Fusion. It released in June 1990. It had some interesting ideas, particularly the fluid physics, but it was far from revolutionary as Populous. The magazines were kind enough in their reviews, giving it 80% or so, but Flood failed to make much of an impact. In October came the more ambitious Powermonger. A strategy game that used the Populous engine, it was much more in line with the expectations of Bullfrog. Gone are the divine powers. Instead, you lean more on strategic command of an army. The goal is to seize control of a fractured world by military force, relaying commands to conquer. Powermonger compared well to Populous in reviews. It wasn't the same runaway success and doesn't have quite the same legacy, but it is seen as a competent follow-up, and proof that the studio's success was not pure luck. In August 1991 came Populous 2: Trials of the Olympian Gods. A safe choice of a sequel, and a likely success on the strength of the first game. It was, in essence, an iteration of the original. It had a little more polish, many more powers and abilities, and a few new features. It was a good game, an improvement over Populous, if not massively innovative. All the same, the magazines loved it, and the game turned out to be another hit. Bullfrog were on a roll. So now, Bullfrog were in a strong position and had a string of hits behind them. They could afford to be a little bolder in their direction. They had assembled a competent team with some very talented individuals on board. Peter remained the face of Bullfrog, though. He'd established good rapport with the computing magazines. He was more than happy to provide interview or comment on a variety of topics. No doubt a few editors had him on speed dial, and he made a multitude of appearances in the press. At this point, he was a celebrity. People loved his games, and Peter seemed to love being in the limelight. Bullfrog's next game was first known as Bob, although this was a working title. It would release as Syndicate. It was a cyberpunk business simulator married to real-time strategy combat. The original gameplay idea was that you could indirectly control your cyborg agents. You could modulate their intelligence, strength, and perception levels, and by doing so, you could influence their behavior as they conducted their mission. As the game developed, they added direct control over your squad of cyborgs instead. The hands-on carnage was far too compelling to ignore. Syndicate was dark, often brutal, but usually rewarding. Its cyberpunk aesthetic was great, and the sandbox city approach felt liberating. It had frantic action with deeper strategy. The unique amalgam of disparate elements was now a Bullfrog signature. They had another classic on their hands. Strong review scores, healthy sales. Business simulation is a recurring trend in Bullfrog's games. It goes all the way back to Peter's failed attempt at self-publishing The Entrepreneur. Things were different now, given that he had a strong team behind him and a reputation for great games. If Peter wanted to do a business simulation, he could, and it would sell. His next idea was Theme Park, which released in June 1994. It was a construction and management sim that gave you a plot of land and allotment of cash. Your job was to build a successful theme park, rake in the money and reinvest profits. Then, developing new rides and expanding available attractions. It's all dressed up in bright colours and cutesy characters. A departure from the grittier, more realistic worlds Bullfrog had created before, but there remains a similar thrill in controlling the fates of the little people. Oversalting the fries to sell more drinks and other devious tricks. Theme Park was yet another success. Review scores were positive, and the game went on to sell over 15 million copies. It's fair to say that Theme Park has not aged well compared to some of Bullfrog's other games. The 3D rendered graphics, once impressive, now look dated, and the interface is a little clunky. The key issue with playing Theme Park today is the existence of Roller Coaster Tycoon. The latter is a superior game on all fronts. But it's important to remember that Roller Coaster Tycoon came out 5 years afterwards. Theme Park walked so it could run. Developing Theme Park for the older machines didn't help either. The lack of a hard drive, limited RAM and colour palette of the Amiga were holding Bullfrog back. Theme Park would be their last Amiga game. It was time to move on to a new generation. By 1994, the Amiga market was starting to slow down. Commodore had gone bankrupt, and the future of the machine was in doubt. For many developers, this was their cue to make a transition to the PC instead. The PC market saw rapid growth, and a world of multimedia and CD-ROM awaited gamers in the mid-1990s. This was a difficult leap for developers who established themselves on the Amiga and Atari ST. The PC market was very different. There was a much wider variety of hardware, the community was less insular, and the enthusiast press wasn't the authority it once was. Software had gone global. Many smaller developers struggled to compete in a broader market. Many didn't survive the transition. Some of the best Amiga developers never found their footing on PC. Sensible Software didn't survive. The Bitmap brothers never realized the same level of success on the new platform. Bullfrog were facing a similar challenge. They had made some legendary games, ranked among the best on the Amiga. Peter Molyneux was a 16-bit god. He could do no wrong. He was responsible for some of the greatest games of a generation and had pioneered a new genre. He was a somebody. He had a reputation. But with the challenges looming ahead, everything was at stake. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, farewell.